Good morning. Welcome to the class. Today, I would like to discuss about a literary genre. So, let me introduce the topic first by asking us some general questions to you. What's your favorite movie? Yes, some of you answered your favorite movie is a horror movie, right? Some of you responded, okay, your favorite movie is an action sort of movie. And some of you may describe, maybe I like pop song, right? So why so? What determines it is a pop song or it is an action movie or it is a sort of romantic movie? It's a romance. What makes difference from one to another and why you identify that? And by what factors you can identify that it is different from each another? The important factor of distinguishing that is there are some certain qualities a movie has, a music has. For that reason, you are treating this is a pop music, this is a romance, or this is an action movie, this is a horror movie, right? So there are some certain qualities the cinema has. For that reason, you are giving a name, a categorization of that sort of movie. So, like that, in literature, there are some certain categories. So, what I mean by that, the word genre. So, this genre comes from a French word that means a kind, a type, a category, right? So, genre means in literature there are some specific norms and traditions and a style of writing. For that, each group of words are called and termed, okay, this is this and this is that. For example, you definitely know what is poem and what is a prose, what is a novel, what is a drama. You can identify that, right? So there are basically three categories of writing in literature. One is called a poetry, another one is called a drama. Another category is called a prose. So let me divide and explain one by one what prose is. So prose means to be a prose, a literary work that are written in very ordinary language, that language that we use in our everyday context, like making a sentence or paragraph. So all the structure of a prose is like it's a normal sentence pattern, not any uh, sort of special language are used in this context. And prose can be two category. One is fiction, another one is non-fiction. So how fiction is different from non-fiction? Fiction is that it's a sort of story where it is created by imagination. For example, in novel, the short story. Here, the storylines are created by the writer, not based on the facts or actual events or not any incident that happened really. It may be, but mostly not. But when you talk about a non-fiction, for example, an autobiography or biography, a sort of essay, it's basically talk about real incidents, a personal experience, not that of imaginations is related to that. So the difference between prose, all are prose, fiction and non-fiction, because they are written in a language that are very ordinary in tone and the pattern and the sentence structure. But the difference between fiction and non-fiction is that one is based on fact, another one is written just out of imagination, like an imaginary story that are told in novels. Now come to the next topic that is called drama. So when we talk about drama, we have a mind the language pattern. What would be a drama? So maybe it's like an action, a dialogue, and this drama is written for any performance in our stage. So the tone and the dialogue pattern is not like that we find in novel and essay or short story. So the language of drama is sort of dialogue and that are written in such a way that will be performed in a stage and the audience will enjoy the dialogue between the characters, right? So it's involved like the characters and the all the settings. So there are also some category of the classifications of the same genre. For example, there are some tragedy, there are some comedy, there are some tragicomedy. Uh, it can be melodrama, right? So based on some incidents and actions, these are different from one to another. For example, when you talk about tragedy, we know what will happen in the end. The end will be some misery happens to the characters, particularly the protagonist. But when you talk about comedy, we have on the minds the in the ending part, the story will be ended by unhappy incidents. And when you talk about it is a melodrama, we know in melodrama all the incidents are happened like killings and brutal incidents and all these things. So the language pattern matters between the distinction of prose and the drama. The drama means when everything happens in a dialogue based and it's all about the actions and incidents. Are you following me? Good. The next topic that I would like to extend is that poetry. So when you talk about a poet, what is your mind? So language, right? The language of poem definitely is not the language that we use in our normal sentence and structure. So structurally, when you talk about poetry, it means it's a sort of difference between the word choices, how the words are organized to create a sort of alliteration, a sort of imagery, a sort of a tone that are distinction from the normal everyday language uses. For example, when you talk about sonnet, what is in your mind? So the lines and the patterning of the sentences, the ending have some similar context and a sort of similarity among the word choices, among the lines, right? And there are some specific norms. The sentence ended in this way that create a sort of special sounds like thing. For example, when you talk about the cat sat on the mat, it creates a sort of alliteration, a similar sounding that creates a sort of image in your mind. It is not the day-to-day language that we use in our everyday context, right? The sentences are very, very different and a sort of aesthetic tone in the context. So the poem has also some different category. It can be free verse without any sort of special rule maintained. It can be an epic like the Iliad, a long narrative poem. It can be a sonnet like the uh, 14 lines poems like the sonnet written by Shakespeare. So every category have some special identity for that we group that. For example, the broadly that we discussed, the the poem, the drama, and then we talk about novel or the prose. So are you with me? Good. Now, I would like to end it up by asking you a questions. Do you believe one piece of literary work can be grouped only one or it can be more? For example, a drama, is it sometimes that can be also a tragedy or also it can be treated as a comedy? Yes. The answer is yes. It's possible one literary piece can be grouped by some certain similarities and features that are common, and we can call that sort of both category it can be covered. For example, when you talk about tragicomedy, a sort of comedy, for example, The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, when you talk about that, it is there are some similar features of the tragic incident at the same time when you talk about it is a comedy. And when you talk about Robert Browning's My Last Dances, it is actually a poem, but the way it is delivered like a dialogue pattern, so it is uh, a sort of dialogue is happening, right? So it's also treated as a poem, also in a dramatic mode, so it is called dramatic monologue. So also possible, one literary piece can be treated as different genre, different groups because of the similarities that they form. So what the necessity of grouping this terminology? Because it says it's a negotiation between the reader and the writer. It creates a sense that, okay, this book is categorized into this category, so definitely I have to set these sort of expectations for the readers, so that it's also responsible the writers to write the same category, maintaining that form. And also when the reader wants to read a novel, he has some enthusiastic mind to read a story like that or imaginary, not written as a form of poetry or not written as a form of any dialogue pattern. But when at the opposite way, a writer can write a poem, his mind is that okay, I have to pick some special category of words choices that makes his distinction from the everyday language, and the alliteration, the sounding, the words ending, all are Siljan words, not the everyday words. And also at the same time, when it is read by a reader in a poem, his expectation is very different set. So it's sort of negotiation that helps, and a contact between reader and writer to develop the writing and read in that category. It helps a lot. Now I would like to finish by just asking you a questions. What's your favorite genre of literature? And do you have any plan to write this sort of genre in the future? Thank you. Thank you for my present for listening and giving uh, a feedback. Thank you.